Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Gratitude Tuesday. My name's Raina. I'm a recovery coach here at Capital Recovery Center. We've been doing some groups the past couple of Tuesdays, trying to branch out a little bit from the topic of gratitude, but it all ties into having a grateful attitude in recovery. And last week we talked about self-care, and this week we're going to talk about boundaries in recovery. So this article is Boundaries in Recovery, what they are, how to set them, and why you need them. And this is from mountainside.com. And it starts, when clients in addiction treatment are working on rebuilding interpersonal relationships, they will likely hear from their clinician, your family is going to set a boundary with you. While setting boundaries is often necessary for families with addicted loved ones, they are not a one-way street. Boundaries in recovery can also be extremely valuable for the clients themselves. And I think it is extremely valuable to have boundaries set. For example, I have heard some clients say, my parents have paid for so much of my treatment and they want me to go to a family holiday party, but they drink a lot. When they voice this concern, I often recommend that the client shares with their parents that they are not ready to be in that environment at this point in their recovery. A common reply is, but I feel like I can't disappoint them anymore. My advice to anyone experiencing this is, if they feel the gathering is not a safe place to be, it is perfectly acceptable to vocalize that they do not feel comfortable. The family should appreciate that the person in recovery is communicating openly about their feelings and taking steps to safeguard the progress they made in treatment. And this brings up a very good point, that a lot of us come into recovery feeling like we have already done so much damage that we don't want to let people down, we don't want to hurt their feelings. But we have to keep in mind that, putting ourselves in situations that could lead to relapse is not going to be conducive for our recovery. And then, the backtracking is going to be more painful than wait for the family and themselves than just speaking up and saying, look, this is how I feel. And I think if you approach it with a calm rationale behind it, most of the time you're going to get the feedback that, they understand how this could, not be a good thing for your recovery. So don't be afraid to speak up when it comes to things like that. So we're going to talk about, what are boundaries? Boundary has been a buzzword in treatment industry. Not everyone knows, however, what it means or how fundamental it can be for someone's overall well-being. By definition, a boundary is a limit, which can be physical, financial, or emotional. Other than actually giving up substances and creating a solid aftercare plan, setting boundaries is the most important lesson to learn in sobriety. Boundaries exist to protect one's personal sense of safety and help delineate what one will and will not accept. Without them, a person may let others negatively impact their emotions. In my personal experience in recovery, this has been a very difficult thing to do. And over the course of the years and learning how to set boundaries and, step away from that people-pleasing dynamic, I've noticed that, it is beneficial to me in my recovery. It can be, like I said, it's an important lesson to learn in sobriety. And it's something that you have to learn how to do because, for myself, when I was using, my boundaries were blurred, if not completely gone, depending on the situation, and we allowed things and people and situations in our lives that we would not have normally done if it wasn't for, being in active addiction. So now you're coming into recovery, putting the drugs aside, but it's also learning how to, reestablish boundaries or, even put them in place, to start. You may not have ever had certain boundaries in your life. So this is something that takes practice. It takes time, and it takes knowing yourself and some self-awareness to say, okay, you know what, maybe this isn't good for me. Maybe this isn't something I should be doing. Maybe this isn't someone I should allow in my life. It comes with some heartache, and you know what I mean? Some situations that you just don't want to be in, but you have to learn from it and, try and improve as you go. So next says, what about why are boundaries necessary for people in addiction recovery? Being able to create and maintain boundaries is an essential skill for people in recovery. But many recoil at the thought of drawing a line with their loved ones because doing so can be uncomfortable. At the same time, if a boundary causes the other person discomfort, that is likely a sign that the boundary was needed in the first place. So this kind of goes to that concept of, like, if you've never said no, when you do say no, it seems offensive to people. They take it as like you're different, you're not like the person you used to be. I've heard all different kinds of things just from saying, look, no, I can't do that. Because people get so used to hearing you say, okay. But it's okay to just say no. They always say like no is a complete sentence. Like you don't need to explain yourself unless you want to. Because sometimes maybe it will be beneficial. But not everybody's going to want to hear it because they're not used to you showing that initiative, to take charge and do what's best for yourself. So it goes on to say, setting a boundary can empower people with substance use disorders to become attuned to their own needs and stand up for themselves. So many have been called selfish during active addiction, and as a result, may feel like they have to be hyper-focused on the needs of others after they complete treatment, whether because of their guilt or the belief that they owe people favors. In other words, they misguidedly think they cannot set boundaries because doing so will further their perceived selfishness, perpetuating the shame and guilt cycle. And this is something that I was guilty of in early recovery, with my children, with other people in recovery. Like I felt that if I continued to say no or continue not to do things, that people were going to think I was being selfish and that I didn't care, or in the case with my children, like so many years of, not being able to do what a parent should do, I tried to overcompensate for that. So here I am doing things and allowing things that I wouldn't have normally, but the guilt and the shame, kind of put me in that position. But I found that as time went on and I communicated clearly with people and communicated with my kids, like, look, I'm still your parent. You know what I mean? So it's as long as you're communicating and are clear about it, it's a lot easier. But a lot of people do feel like they're being selfish if they say no. We have to learn the difference between self-care and being selfish, which is a fine line to walk and try and kind of figure out. And it takes some time to adjust to that because it felt selfish for a long time. And now I'm starting to feel like, okay, I need to do this because if I'm not good for me, I can't be good for anybody else. So the next section is how someone in recovery can create healthy boundaries. To set healthy boundaries, a person in recovery first needs to invest in their own growth and work on themselves both inside and outside of treatment. This could involve seeking out a therapist, getting a sponsor, or completing the 12 steps. Each of these practices can strengthen the person's emotional well-being and sense of self, as well as their ability to deal with conflict or triggers. And, look at all different avenues. You know what I mean? You might want to look at all of these, a therapist, a sponsor, a 12-step program, a spiritual program. You don't have to find a one and done, and that's something that we talk about a lot here because we talk about finding your recovery path and how to build your recovery capital and what recovery looks like for you. So you're not limited to one thing or another. At some point after completing treatment, they will need to put sober skills such as stress reduction, conflict resolution, and boundary setting into action in their home or work environment. Creating a boundary may feel strange at first. That's what we were just saying, and it does. It feels very strange. but it can become more natural with practice, allowing a person to better handle discomfort in the future. Recovery coach Alex Lara shares their experience setting boundaries in recovery. I must have skipped that part. But Raina, recovery coach, can share some experience with setting boundaries in early recovery. And that biggest one is saying, I'm sorry, no, I can't. When I first got clean, one of the big things that kept me plugged in was I was someone who had a driver's license and a vehicle. And I was able to pick up people and bring them to meetings or take them home, or if someone needed to run an errand or wasn't doing anything, I would just keep plugged in with other people in recovery by doing those things. But as time went on and my life began to fill up and, you go back to work or the family is back in your life and, you're spending time, enjoying the gifts of recovery, more and more being able to do that for people was harder and harder for me to do. And I felt bad. I felt like I was being selfish because it wasn't so much that I didn't want to pick anyone up or I couldn't. It was just a matter of, I have to set this as a priority tonight, but maybe tomorrow I can give you a ride. You got to find that balance that works for you. So we're going to talk about some common examples of boundaries for recovering individuals. So this is boundary is a broad term. Here is what setting boundaries could look like. Limiting social media use, sticking to a regular gym routine or nutritious diet, leaving social gatherings early if the party gets out of hand, needing roommates, family members, alcohol and prescription drugs stored out of sight, avoiding triggering environments such as bars and casinos, and limiting contact with old connections who may not be conducive to a new life in sobriety. So we'll take a look at some of these. It's also about limiting social media. So this could be, social media can be something that can be extremely beneficial to your recovery. There's a wide variety of things available out there, such as our groups that we hold here virtually, as well as online 12-step meetings, endless, YouTube videos and articles and different things that you can find in social media. I mean, even as it comes down to Facebook, the different things that people post, the different videos, the different inspirational memes or what have you, can all be really great things for your recovery. But then there's also that drawback. You have people posting things that, might make it hard for you to focus on what's important, or that you feel like it's kind of tearing down your self-esteem or the progress that you've made, just negative talk. There's so many things. And it's just a matter of being able to kind of filter through and limit what you're involved in, at least until you get to a point where you feel like, okay, maybe I can start doing this now, or maybe, whatever it may be. But limiting it, especially in the beginning, can be helpful to avoid any negativity. And a lot of times we still see people, in the case of a Facebook or a Twitter or that sort of thing, you have all these people on there that you may have used with, are still using, and those things popping up in your feed is not going to be a very good thing for your recovery. So the next one, it says sticking to a regular gym routine or a nutritious diet. So this is a boundary that not so much where you're saying, okay, no, I can't do this, but this is more of okay, I'm going to commit to this and I'm going to do this for me. So that way, if you get invited out to dinner, you'd be like, okay, let me see, you don't have to go out and, eat a giant pizza or whatever you have to do. So it's kind of okay, sticking with a routine. The next one, leaving a social gathering early if the party gets out of hand. And I have a feeling this is going to come up a lot with the holidays coming. A lot of people have families that aren't in recovery as well. So it might be, wine at the dinner table at Thanksgiving, or drinks on Christmas Eve, or the, obvious party on New Year's Eve. personally, there's things I kind of had to avoid anything like that, especially in the beginning. And now in recovery, I spend a lot of time with my family who I don't have to worry about those things. And my comfort level is okay. So if my mom has a glass of wine at Christmas dinner, it doesn't bother me. But be aware of those things. And if anytime you feel like it's too much, you're allowed to say, hey, I think I'm gonna, head home. Needing roommates, family members, alcohol, and prescription drugs stored out of sight. This can be very triggering for people, especially if you were a prescription drug user. So, or if alcohol was your main drug. So asking, people to kind of like, oh, hey, can you put that in a cabinet or put it out of sight, that sort of thing. And most of the time people are okay with doing that. They don't want to make you feel uncomfortable. I know that when my oldest daughter came to stay with me, she drinks, she's of legal age and she drinks occasionally. And she had left a few like little wine coolers in the fridge. And she's like, is that going to bother you? Like she was very aware of it and made sure it was okay. And if it wasn't, she would, put it somewhere else. So I appreciated that. Avoiding triggering environments such as bars and casinos. And this can go for anything too. Obviously, bars and casinos, there's drinking, there's drugs, there's all these different things, and it's readily available, and it's going to make it a little too convenient to use. But also you gotta watch environments as far as like, neighborhoods where you used to cop drugs, or, neighborhoods where maybe the liquor store you visited every day, things like that. Like for me, for a while, the one Wawa by my house, like I had to avoid that Wawa for a while because that was where I would go. So just be mindful of those things. And if you feel like you're being triggered by, a route home from work, or, the way you're taking to someone's house, find alternative routes until you feel like, okay, I'm okay, I can go by here. And if you do go by and you still feel triggered, go back to that alternative route. There's nothing wrong with avoiding all those things. And then limiting contact with old connections who may not be conducive to a new life in sobriety. So we talked about places and things, and now we're talking about people, like the 3 things that you need to be very cautious of in recovery. So, if you have, old connections or old friends out there still stored in your phone, like I said, like on your Facebook or Instagram or something like that, you may just want to delete those numbers, remove those people from like your news feed or from your friends. And, try and, stick around people who are doing the same thing you're doing. Like you want to find your little recovery community wherever it may be. So the next part is, what types of boundaries can families set for their loved ones in recovery? There we go. Because addiction is a disease of the brain, it can cause people to act out in ways they normally would not, potentially compromising their bonds with others. Even when a person returns home from treatment, their family may experience residual feelings of guilt, distrust, and worry. Therefore, it can be beneficial for families to learn how to set boundaries with their loved one in recovery sooner than later. And if this is something that you are struggling with or your family is struggling with, please, every third Saturday, we're here from 11 to 1, and we focus on family. We'd love to have you come in and, share what your struggles are, and maybe some hurdles that we could possibly help you overcome. So some of the common boundaries can include the following: refusing to pay for their loved ones' bills or provide them with free housing, expecting loved ones to return home by a certain mutually agreed upon time if they live in the same household, limiting how much they cook for or clean after their family member out of treatment, needing a cool down period during emotionally charged conversations to self-regulate, and requiring their loved one to continue to the next step of treatment. And these are all very reasonable boundaries. I know it can be frustrating having these boundaries because, early recovery can be very stressful and anxiety ridden already. But you have to also understand that, the other party needs to set boundaries for themselves as well to avoid hurt. And as some of these like imply, it will help you in the long run as well, even though it might not feel like it at the time. So like the first one says refusing to pay for their loved ones' bills or provide them with free housing. For a lot of us, I'm sure we were contributing much, if anything, to a household. And in some cases, we were, taking away from a household to fuel our drug addiction. So, families would be apprehensive about, paying bills or providing housing. And even, I know I used a lot, like I'm short on the electric bill this month. I need $50. I don't know how many times I was short on the same bill in the same month. But they've heard every excuse to try and get money to continue our using. So for them to like put this in place, they have to protect themselves. The one that says expecting loved ones to return home by a certain mutually agreed upon time if they live in the same household. This is understandable as well. It might feel like you're being treated like a child. And I struggled with this one a little bit when I first got clean, because I could not go back to the place that I was living because of my drug use, and I had to sleep on my mom's couch for the first 6 months. And it was, well, if you're not going to come home, you need to tell me, or, if you're going to be home, you need to be before this so we can lock the door, all those sorts of things. And it felt like I was a child again. But at some point I had to realize that, she's doing this because she spent most nights sitting up, wondering if I was okay. And, being clean, I had to give her the respect to say, listen, so she didn't worry about me. So limiting how much they cook for or clean after their family member out of treatment. So this is another one where, picking up the literal wreckage of our using, a lot of people are not the cleanest. We kind of would just take what we wanted and run, basically. So, limiting how much the family cooks or cleans after a family member. It's also to show okay, take some initiative. You need to, take some responsibility, especially if you're living with like a family member or something. And I wasn't charged to stay with my mother. She didn't ask me for anything. She just asked me for the respect, of living in her household. And that meant cleaning up after myself. And, if I cook, please make something for everybody, all those sorts of things. You really can't expect to, have a free place to stay and a maid and a cook all in the same house from somebody that, you put through the ringer when it came to active addiction. So the next one is needing a cool down period during emotionally charged conversations to self-regulate. This goes with both parties again. This one was a big one that helped me as far as, rebuilding relationships, especially when it came to my children. Because, I would get worked up and then I would lash out and then it would just come back and it was just a back and forth. And it was not good for either of us. It becomes very toxic and you say things you don't mean and they say things they don't mean. And then, you're left hurt, they're left hurt, and you're back where you started when you were using. So there's nothing wrong for, the family or for you yourself in recovery. Just, listen, I need to take a deep breath before I say something I'm going to regret, and to just step away. That can be one of the strongest boundaries that you can set when things get a little heated. And the last one, requiring their loved one to continue to the next step of treatment. Again, this is only to benefit, the person in recovery, because you'll go to your detox, you'll go for your, rehab period. When you come home, there's things to continue having a successful recovery, such as an IOP program, a 12-step program, a spiritual program. If you suffer with mental health, seeking a therapist, or a mental health IOP program, whatever it may be, to help you along with your treatment. And it's a reasonable and a loving request that a loved one might make of you. 3 nights a week to go help further your recovery and to help you in the long run. It's going to benefit you and your family as well. So it's important for families to understand that they cannot dictate someone else's behavior or control them. They can, however, set limits on what kind of behavior they will allow in their home or near other family members. And that goes to life in general. You can't dictate what someone else does, how they're going to act. You can't control them, but you can control the way you react to what's going on. In addition to voicing these needs aloud, families also must uphold and maintain the boundary. You put that boundary up, you take it down. You put it up, you take it down. You go to put it up, it's not going to get respected because they expect you to take it down. So you have to be consistent, and you have to make sure that there's like an understanding. And if an issue arises, discuss it. There might need to be an adjustment to your boundary at some point, but you need to be consistent with that boundary. And then they must establish what appropriate consequences should occur if their loved one crosses a line. Otherwise, the boundary is ineffective. So if you cross it and nothing is done, again, that's like where the addict behavior is going to come in, and they're going to just keep pushing that boundary back and taking advantage. So boundary setting is an acquired skill, but one with immense payoff. It is a form of self-empowerment that fosters feelings of pride and comfort when done correctly. Voicing personal needs and priorities to others can seem daunting, but this is critical to maintaining healthy relationships and shared expectations with relatives, friends, and even employers. And so, like I said, boundaries are such an important part of recovery. For both you, for your family, for anybody that you have a relationship with, and keep that line of communication open, because, even with the boundaries set, you want to make sure that both parties understand why it's set, and as things evolve, how to either adjust or, address different issues as they come up. And you'll find that keeping that line of communication open and being consistent with the boundaries is going to go a long way in fostering recovery for everybody involved. So with that, I want to thank you guys for joining us for another Gratitude Tuesday. And please, please, please come in and see me. We'd love to get some feedback from you and see some faces in Capital Recovery Center here. We're always glad to have you. And with that, you have a good night.